just a few minutes ago. Mr. Lamborn.
And thank you both. Dr. Brown, if you could just finish what Dr. Benishek had been asking you, and then you ran out of time, but you said you did a study on the VA versus the private sector and incentives and results and outcomes. What could VA be doing to better match, in at least in productivity terms, the private sector?
So my specific aim and goal of that engagement was to actually teach the VA how to do their own work, because I didn't want to be a long-term consultant. I like staying at home, but I knew the VA and I knew the private sector, so I actually gave them what I thought were the tools so they could actually make their own decisions. And I think that's what we need to help the VA do, is have more people who understand what the private sector is within the VA and then doing the analysis. So there, to me, they basically adopted the policies of how they could run their own internal practices of dialysis, and this isn't difficult where how you use the number, what type of employees, RN versus techs. So they had a best practice within the VA in their own VISN, but they hadn't shared that learning across the VISN, and that just by sunlighting it, they then saw what the best practice was. What they didn't do then is to take some risks politically about how they then could utilize the external world and saying, is it better to outsource this dialysis if that person's driving 200 miles or 100 miles? And because we pay, the VA pays for travel for these patients and for the customer convenience and the pay, so they did not adopt at that time. The VA's now changed some of its practices 10 years later about doing their own dialysis, of owning their own dialysis. But I don't think they actually analyze it from a, is it better to keep it from within or outsource it as well as we could.
Okay. And then finally, you have mentioned, and two others have mentioned, that your salary is tied to certain, like employee engagement or other factors. In other words, you're not just paid a salary and that's it. You're paid, and then you have to produce something on top of that, right?
Top management, all the way down to the manager at Duke, has system metrics, so we're tied to the overall system. We have our own unit metrics, and we have personalized metrics, both short and long.
Is that something the VA could learn from as well?
Yeah.
Adding incentives to salaries?
I think the VA should do that, but I would actually argue that currently the VA has metric themselves to death. They have metric fatigue. There are 500 metrics and measures, and so you can't pay attention to the biggest ones. So the issue is that if you're looking for change, look at your leadership. Without leaders, you won't get the change.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Hoskamp. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hughes.